Hello my dear friends, you're in the military with summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 4th of September of 2025. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. Right after the end of the summits on the territory of China, we're talking about the SCO summit, the Coalition of Willing summit started on the territory of France. Right before this summit, Zelensky made lots of very interesting statements. He was trying to tell the world, to take the United States of America and the Western countries, that he is not going to accept any proposal from the Russian side. Zelensky once again spoke out against the withdrawal of troops from the DPR in exchange for ending the war, as Russia proposes. Who will guarantee that Putin will not continue? No one. We cannot give up territory. This is a very powerful line of our defense. Putin has already lost many soldiers there. If he goes further, he will need years and lose millions of soldiers, so we will not give him such gift. That was stated by Zelensky before the beginning of the summit of the Coalition of Willing. Very important summit. Right before this summit, Zelensky made a very interesting statement together with the President of France, Macron. The coalition of the willing is ready to provide Ukraine with security guarantees as soon as the ceasefire is reached. That was stated by Macron, but Zelensky opposed him. The coalition of the willing looks theoretically today. He probably insulted Macron and every single member of the coalition of willing, so that is why he decided to fix himself, to change his words by saying that he still believes in this coalition. But obviously these words didn't save the situation. Later the summit started, and right here in this video we can see how Zelensky entered the room where the coalition of willing was located. Probably the most important person is this one. This is Steve Witkoff, the special envoy of the United States of America. He came to Paris with the purpose to discuss with the coalition of willing the further steps, but you know that later we got very interesting details that right after the Coalition of Willing summit started, just 20 or 45 minutes later, Stephen Witkoff left this summit. And this is very interesting because obviously the European countries wanted to talk for as long as possible with the special envoy of the United States of America and then to have a call with the President of the United States of America, but something obviously went wrong. If you ask my opinion, what did go wrong? Obviously, Stephen Witkoff came to Paris not to listen to Zelensky, not to listen to this coalition of willing. He came with very short proposal, most likely proposal that was sent to Zelensky by the Russian President Vladimir Putin. You need to accept demands of the Russian Federation, otherwise there is no need to talk at all. So this is how the situation with Witkoff was described. Steve Witkoff, US President Donald Trump's special envoy for the Middle East, has left the Elysee Palace where a meeting of the Coalition of Willing is being held. Source European Pravda corresponded from the scene. Details: Witkoff joined the Coalition of the Willing meeting and left the Elysee Palace about 40 minutes after it began. So it was very short meeting. You know that some sources are saying that he left this meeting even faster, just after 20 minutes after it began. So as for now, we don't know for sure what is happening. As we understand, Zelensky and the Coalition of Willing will have a call with the President of the United States of America, but they will get a simple answer. We need to settle the conflict peacefully, and if we want to finish the war as soon as possible, Zelensky must talk with Putin and he must accept some demands of the Russian side. But we all remember that one of the most important demands from the Russian side is the referendum, where people of Ukraine will be able to vote for some territorial concessions in Russian favor. And obviously, to hold a referendum, first of all, Zelensky must end martial law. But if he ends martial law, then he must probably hold president elections, and obviously he will lose his power. So Zelensky is trying to find an exit from this situation, but it seems that there is no exit from this situation. There is just one exit from this situation personally for him: to continue the special military operation. And it seems Now let's move to the ground and let's discuss the situation. The Russians continue their offensive operation in the Zaporizhzhia direction. During the previous 24 hours, several very interesting videos were published from the village by the name of Mala Takmachka. So let's take a look at this video, and here we can see how Ukrainians were attacking Russian positions in the southeastern part of the settlement. Probably the Ukrainians managed to discover another group of sabotage and reconnaissance forces. So we are using this video just for one purpose. We haven't adjusted anything based on this video. We just confirmed that either this part of the settlement of Mala Takmachka is in the gray zone or under complete Russian control. At the same time, pro-Ukrainian resources reported and confirmed that indeed during the previous days there were some movements and some progress on the ground in the Russian favor. Based on the report of Deep State, we haven't adjusted anything, but obviously this is a very important piece of news. The Russians are advancing in these fields and are getting closer and closer to the southeastern part of the settlement of Mala Takmachka. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in this eastern Zaporizhzhia direction. According to information we have, according to the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, according to the Group of Forces East, the armed forces of the Russian Federation, as a result of very heavy clashes on the eastern Zaporizhzhia direction, managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Novoselovka. The Group of Forces East published this video where we can see how exactly the Russians were fighting for this territory. And in the final part of this video, we can see lots of episodes of how Russians were raising their Russian flag in different parts of the settlement. The Russians raised the flag in the southern, in the eastern, and in the northern parts of the settlement of Novoselovka. Based on this video and based on the report of the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, we colored this territory in Russian favor. According to information we have, the 36th Brigade of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation managed to establish complete control over this territory. Furthermore, several mappers, pro-Western mappers and pro-Ukrainian neutral mappers confirmed that right after the Russians secured the village of Novoselovka, they began advancing further in the southern direction towards the villages of Sosnovka and Horoshe. Furthermore, some sources reported that the settlement of Horoshe was already taken by the Russians. So summarizing everything, most likely by the end of the 4th of September, we might see something like this in the eastern Zaporizhzhia direction. You know that this is very important progress on the ground that was achieved by the Russians, because as you can see, there is a very huge dense network of the fortifications between the settlement of Maliivka. We're talking about these trenches and strongholds that go in the western direction towards the road R85. And as you can see, this the complex network of the fortifications was probably created to repel possible attacks from the south. But the Russians, as a result of clashes for the villages of Novoselovka, Vorona, and Yanvarskaya, managed to globally outflank this dense network of the fortifications, and now the Russians will continue their offensive operation from the north in the southern direction, which means that Ukrainians most likely will not be able to hold their positions for a long period of time. It seems that the Zaporizhzhia defense is about to collapse or collapsing currently and will collapse in coming days or obviously weeks. So the Russians continue their offensive. The next days we are waiting for additional updates. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Novopavlovka direction. The Russians continue their offensive operation on the line between the settlement of Moravka and the settlement of Novopavlovka. Currently, there are very heavy clashes for this area. I would like to remind you that several days ago, pro-Russian resources published this video where we can see how Russians were dropping on the heads of Ukrainian soldiers different leaflets, lists suggesting and proposing Ukrainians to surrender. And this is the first step, obviously, during the battle for this territory. Most likely the Russians, after they dropped these suggestions, these proposals, began their offensive operation, and currently probably the fierce clashes in this area are taking place for the stronghold that looks like butterfly. So the clashes are taking place here. The Russians are attacking this territory with artillery, with FPV drones, which means that in coming days, both this stronghold and the settlement settlement of Moravka could be taken by the Russians completely. And then the Russians will continue their offensive operation in the direction of Novopavlovka from the northeast and, of course, from the southwest from the settlement of Filia. So the battle for Novopavlovka may start very, very soon. Now let's talk about the Pokrovsk direction. Very important updates are coming from this area. Probably the most important is that Ukrainian spies and the Ukrainian network of agents published today lots of pictures and videos from the city of Donetsk. The Unit Observer publishes photos of Russian equipment being redeployed from the Kherson direction to the Konstantinovka direction as a part of a large-scale operation regrouping, which is likely aimed at pressing the taking of this Donetsk region completely. So lots of vehicles and equipment have been redeployed. Ukrainian agents made lots of pictures, and now we can see these pictures in the internet, and we can find them in the open sources. This is very important because this is another confirmation that the Russians are going all in. This is all in. The Russians are going to try to take the rest of Donbass during the next months, and I believe that the Russians believe that they can do this. Very interesting to see what is going to happen during the next days. But as for the current situation, fierce clashes are taking place for the settlement of Mirnograd. If you remember, during the previous video, we discussed this episode, how Russians were attacking Mirnograd using armored vehicle. As for the end of the 4th of September of 2025, we still haven't received anything, whether the Russians managed to improve their positions, to dig in deeper, to probably cut Ukraine positions around the settlement of Novoselovka. As of now, we don't have anything. So that is why nothing additional, nothing special happened during the previous 24 hours. But one thing I know for sure, currently there are very heavy clashes for these territories, and both the Russians and the Ukrainians are trying to do everything they can with the purpose to establish complete control over this territory and to force the Ukrainians or the Russians to fall back from this area. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the area of breakthrough. According to information we have, the Russians managed to re-enter the settlement by the name of Shakawa. I would like to remind you that several days ago the Ukrainians managed to counterattack and to restore control over the territory, but now the Russians managed to regroup, probably to bring additional forces, and as a result of counter-offensive operation, some positions on the territory of the eastern part of the settlement were retaken. As for the settlement of Konstantinovka, currently there are very heavy clashes to the west of the settlement, to the south of the settlement, and to the east of the settlement. Russians continue bombardments of the settlement of Novoselovka. It seems that they're planning to begin offensive operation in this area also in coming days. Furthermore, the Russians continue bombing Ukraine positions in the area of the settlement of Ivanopolia. As you can see from this video, the Russians are using multiple launch rocket systems, and these strikes reminds me something like artillery preparation. It seems that the Russians are going to cross the river of Kryvyi Tarets and to begin offensive operation on the territory of Plishevka. As for the area around the settlement of Pritechna, according to pro-Ukrainian resources and neutral mappers, the Ukrainians counterattacked in this area and restored control over some positions. And it seems that Ukrainians are ready to fight with the Russians for the southeastern part of the settlement. The Russians were forced to fall back. They left the Killzone area, and now the Russians, after they finish regrouping, most likely will try to attack the city of Konstantinovka once again. As for the Siversk direction, during the previous 24 hours, lots of artillery strikes were recorded. The Russians are using lots of artillery systems. It seems that they're trying to reduce and to destroy the entire Siversk direction to ruins. The Russians intensify their activities from the south of the city. Most likely, when talking about geolocations, the concentration of Russian fire, the Russians are going to attack the city of Siversk from the southeast using railways. So using these routes of attack. Most likely the Russians are planning to continue advancing according to geolocation through the settlement of Kuzminovka and Zvanovka. Obviously the Russians will try to attack the city of Siversk in the shortest routes of attack from the east, but when talking about this direction, there are very powerful strongholds and trenches right in front of Russian forces, which means that this is not going to be a very easy trip, but obviously as an attack to distract attention, the Russians will do this as well. And of course the Russians are about to finish the battle for the Serebryanka forest and to get the river of Seversky Donetsk from the north. At least today this information was confirmed by several pro-Russian resources. The Russians are about to begin offensive here. Obviously they need short regrouping after very heavy clashes for the territory of the forest, and most likely completely different brigades will continue offensive operation further in the south. As of now, the Russians are trying to destroy as many as possible positions around the settlement of Dronika, strongholds of the armed forces of Ukraine, very fortified, very well fortified area of the armed forces of Ukraine. First they need to secure this territory and then they will try to cross the river. As for the Lyman direction, during the previous 24 hours, the biggest changes were on the ground were recorded exactly in this area. First, let's compare the map between the dates. This is the situation by the end of the 3rd of September of 2025, and this is the situation by the end of the 4th of September. As you can see, according to different mappers, the Russians improved their positions on the way toward the settlement of Druzhelyubovka. This information was provided by Nelson mappers. The Russians managed to secure completely the settlement of Lushenkova. This information was provided by the same resource. As of now, the Ministry of Defense haven't confirmed this information. Furthermore, the Russians continue their offensive operation from the south in the northern direction on the territory of Shandrigolova. The Russians are tightening the news around Ukraine position, and it seems that Ukrainians most likely in coming days will be forced to fall back from this area. Otherwise, they would be caught in cauldron and without any chances for evacuation. And the most important update is coming from the area of the settlement of Dirilova. Pro-Ukrainian resources reported that the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly on their way towards the settlements of Dirilova and the Drobushova. The Russians, as you can see, took under control lots of trenches, tree lines and fortifications in this area, and now they can attack further in the southern direction without paying a significant, let's say, hours for clashes for Shandrigolova. They can continue moving further in the southern direction, and they will handle with Shandrigolova in coming days. So the village of Shandrigolova shouldn't stop Russians from their offensive operation further to the south. Furthermore, during the previous 24 hours, lots of videos were geolocated to the west of the river of Nitrius. And here we can see how Russians were attacking Ukraine vehicles, infantry fighting vehicles, just armored vehicles, light vehicles that were moving towards the river of Nitrius. It seems that Ukrainians currently are trying to bring additional reinforcements and reserves to the settlements of Korovy Yar, Krymki, Alexandrivka and Novoselovka with the purpose to organize additional defense to the west of the river of Nitrius. It seems that this defense layer of the armored forces of Ukraine is not hasn't been prepared yet properly, so that is why the Russians can continue their offensive operation either not just in the southern direction or in the northern direction towards the settlement of Borova. The Russians can continue their offensive operation to the west of the river of Nitrius, and this is the Oskol or the Izum direction. The Russians controlled this territory in 2022, but they were forced to fall back from this territory as a result of Ukrainian counter-offensive operation in the Kharkiv region. But now the Russians continue moving further in the western direction, and this can lead to complete collapse of logistics for the entire Borova direction if Russians can cut these villages. We are talking about Korovy Yar, Rubtsy and Lazova. Most likely the Russians will not enter the forest around the village of Oskol. Maybe they will try to establish control over the edge positions, but if they can take this pocket under control, the most northern part of the Donetsk region, then the Ukrainians in the area of Borova will be cut from supply and support. As for the northern Kupiansk direction, during the previous 24 hours, additional changes were recorded in Russian favor in the vicinity of the settlement of Stepova Novoselovka. The Russians managed to take under control lots of territories around the village, but as we can see, some part of the settlement of Stepova Novoselovka still remains under control of the armed forces of Ukraine. So the Russians, they don't have very huge dynamic in this area, but from week to week we have additional progress on the ground. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.